Well,
Okay.
you'll do your.
Just,
Okay, this is good.
I'll just tell you later.
It's one, yeah.
I'll
I know.
just tell you later.
Good evening. The Madison County Board of Education regular session board meeting for Thursday, July 20th is now called to order. Sorry, I hadn't turned the page yet. Application.
I will.
Mr. Massey, would you lead us?
I will. Dear Lord, thank you for this day where we can come together and take care of business for the schools and for the kids here in Madison County. We just thank you for the summer that you've given us time to spend with our families and get ready for this exciting new year coming forward, and just bless this evening in your name. Amen. All right, I recommend approval of the agenda dated July 20th, 2017.
Motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to recommend the agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, and I recommend approval of the minutes for June the 1st, the 12th, and the 28th.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion regarding the minutes? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, just a couple updates. Yesterday, we had a meeting with our leadership teams. It was all of our principals, assistant principals, and some of the other teacher leaders came. We met at Aegis yesterday. Dave was able to stop by, and Nathan checked in for a few minutes before heading to work. But the takeaway from there was a very exciting time for our school administrators. It's going to be one of our focuses as we go forward on learning communities and really strengthening that through a team effort in our buildings, a lot of collaborative work. So we're really excited about that. You're going to be hearing more about that. We're all going to be kind of learners through that process. Tomorrow we have new teachers coming in for new teacher orientation, and other teachers come back. All teachers come back Monday, and there'll be a Monday through Thursday work week for teachers next week, and then kids come a week from Wednesday. Our institute will be a week from Tuesday at the VBC, and you guys are invited there. Will be from 8:30 to about 11:30, and we're looking forward to that. That will be our kickoff day there too, and we'll all be fired up and ready for kids the next day. So on the agenda, some informational items that we have, and this was at the request from you guys, just to discuss, kind of give you an update of where we are with our pre-K and Office of School Readiness pre-K units and grants. The grants are tiered from the Office of School Readiness, depending on the number of years. There's some federal funding mixed in there, and there's also some developmental pre-K units that we have that focus on getting our special needs kids ready for that first year of kindergarten. And so we've got a lot of information here for you and a lot of numbers, and Tim is going to present some of this information to you, and then I've also, Jeff Malone is here, and Ms. Poole, and so Jeff is a principal with pre-K, and so we're going to basically be here for you guys to ask questions, whether it's Tim or Mary, Mark, me, or Jeff. So we're all here to answer any questions you have by this. So Tim?
So I think the kind of the question that came up at the last board meeting is, why do some pre-K programs have to pay and some don't? So that was sort of what I was tasked with, and coming up with some information for you, hopefully to explain that for you. But hopefully you can see from the information that's in your folder, and Mr. Massey may have a hard copy of that too if you need to, if you'd rather look at it that way. But you can see that what I did was list the grant that was awarded for each of our 24 Office of School Readiness pre-K grants this year, and I listed the fixed cost for each of those programs. And the fixed cost kind of tried to just break down in an approximate way down at the bottom of that sheet. So you have the cost of the lead teacher, you have the cost of the auxiliary teacher, and then you have the cost associated with required trainings that those teachers have to attend, or the program or that program gets fined $500 per ding that they get for not adhering to those rules. So we looked at the kind of the fixed cost. You see that some of the fixed costs at schools are different than others. The primary reason for that difference would be the experience of the teacher. So if you see a fixed cost at a school that's substantially higher than another school, the reason for that is they have a much more experienced teacher or somebody with a higher degree kind of thing. So obviously you look at the grant, you look at the fixed cost, and then you see that there's a difference, okay? The chart you have, I believe, is broken down by Title I school, non-Title I schools. But in our Title I schools, obviously they use their Title I funds to pay for the difference in that grant. I did want to mention one other thing. On the grants, you see two schools that don't show a negative out there when it comes between the difference between their grant amount and their fixed cost. In both of those schools, they still have a deficit. While it shows a $20,000 surplus there, whatnot, their fixed cost would also include buying classroom furniture, classroom equipment. That's about a $35,000 expenditure when it's all done. So really, they have a $15,000 deficit. They just don't have a deficit over the cost of the teacher and auxiliary and the training that's there. But so in our Title I schools, you see that the deficit, it's covered through the use of Title I funds. So that leaves us with our non-title schools. And we have to find an alternate means to cover that deficit. This can be, so in looking at those schools, basically the non-title schools that can charge or that are eligible to charge, you've got Central, you've got Lynn Fanning number 1 and number 2, you've got Mount Carmel, and you've got Riverton number 1. Now, the reason that you don't have Endeavor this year and the reason that you don't have Riverton number 2 is because both of those programs receive their grants are federal funds, and any program that receives federal dollars cannot charge, okay? The grants that I just mentioned to you, the Central, Lynn Fanning 1 and 2, Mount Carmel, and Riverton number 1, they're not federal. They're not monies coming from federal dollars, okay? So those grants can charge, okay? And in schools where we're looking to find some way to make up the difference, and you see the difference is significant, okay? In most cases, somewhere between 15 and, if you look at a case like Lynn Fanning that has 2 grants and probably both about $16,000 deficit, I mean, you're looking at making up between $30,000 and $40,000 or so at that school, all right? So it's not a case where we need to be using local dollars and spending federal dollars in our Title I schools. We've got to find some kind of alternate source of revenue. So one of the things that OSR does, and it's also in your folder there, while they don't, it's not a requirement of OSR that you charge, they do put together guidelines if you do have to charge to make up that deficit, okay? And they base it kind of like our chart does for determining free and reduced lunch for our children, based on the home income, based on the number of people living in that home. They've come up with a matrix there to determine how much each family would have to pay for their child to attend. When you compare what it's being, the amount of money that they're charging versus what's done in the private sector, I mean, it's still an incredible bargain, okay? So with that, if there's any questions.
So we've known this situation for a while, like we have a deficit, right?
We have a deficit.
But I mean, it was not a surprise that we have a deficit.
No, yeah.
But the surprise came that we decided to charge, right? I mean, that was a surprise to
No,
parents.
the surprise was that we couldn't charge everybody because there's federal funds
Right.
in some of the grants. So then we knew we couldn't charge in the Title I schools because there's federal funding to help with that. But we didn't realize there was federal funding in the non-Title I grants. When we got that news, we could not charge. So it led to really, the only complicated situation is really at Jeff's school where one section, that's the grant number 2 from Riverton, receives federal funding we can't charge. The grant number 1 he receives is a huge shortfall, so we have to charge to get there. And you can't use district funds to catch them up unless you use district funds to catch everybody up. That would be the approximate, that would be the 19,000, from that last column would be the district cost. We'd have to do them all. If we did one, we got to do everybody.
For all the non-Title ones.
For all the non-Title ones and the Title ones. We'd have to do it for Title I schools too, because it'd be a supplanting issue. If we just did it for the non-Title ones, well, you also have to do it for the Title ones, or you're supplanting what the federal funds give there. So if we just did one school, we'd have to do all 23. We didn't realize that. So Jeff's been kind of communicating with parents on that. Jeff, you want to kind of talk a little bit about how that's?
Well, like I said, when we got word of that, obviously, as Ms. Scully explained, we sent a letter describing what the parents would have to pay. But yes, as I said, it could only go to the last, to the first month.
So last year, we had a pre-K at Riverton that was not federally funded.
It was, we just didn't know.
Oh, it was last year.
There
And then
was some
anyway-
federal funds in there, we didn't know that. The auditors, when the auditors came back, that's when they came back to say, hey, turns out in
Nobody in
Mobile.
the state of Alabama was informed that has these OSR grants, that federal funds were involved.
So last year, we had it and didn't know it, and then we got another one this year.
They were all federal funds.
Oh, they're all.
The initial developmental grants were, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
So, but we just discovered this through the state examiners. They didn't even know. State Department of Education still probably doesn't know the full extent of it. And that we were informed in May, this May.
And this program, Sherry, has always been under the governor's office. This was
Not through the State Department of Education.
Governor Bentley's baby. And they never bothered.
The other baby.
To disclose that there was federal money that they were taking to make all of this happen. I mean, I think everybody in the state of Alabama, correct me if I'm wrong, they thought this was just money that the governor was putting into pre-K.
State dollars.
State dollars. And then we find out that, oh no, it's federal, and that is a whole new ballgame.
So May is when we found out that the dollars we thought we could use to make up the shortfall were no longer available because of the bucket they were in. So it wasn't until May that we came to the conclusion that we no longer had the ability to cover this shortfall within the system using system dollars of any sort, whether that be local, Title I, Tier 1, whatever.
That's correct, because it would be supplanting because our Title I schools are covered with federal dollars.
And correct me if I'm wrong, we're not required to offer pre-K. That's your question, I'm sorry. Money, curriculum. We're not required in any way to offer pre-K. We do
The
that.
Office of School Readiness does not fall under the Alabama State Department of Education. It's a totally separate entity. It's not a requirement.
So it's something that we are doing for the community in order to try to better offer educational services, but something that is not fully funded by the state or federal funds.
So some of these programs don't have federal funds, is this true?
Like the number 2, what's listed on here, I'm sorry, the number 1 pre-K this year doesn't have federal funding, but last year it did.
But last year, that same one was $150,000.
Right.
This year.
So there was, and when those initial grants were $150,000, that is a stipulation. That was a stipulation that we knew from OSR while we did not know they were federal funds. That was a requirement from OSR. In the initial year of the grant, you couldn't charge. And when it's a $150,000 grant, you didn't need, it did cover the expenditures of the program, so you didn't have a need to charge that year.
So we found out basically in May that we would have to find a new avenue or revenue stream, and I guess made the decision in May to decide that the parents would have to be responsible to make up the shortfall when, if available.
Or the local school.
Right, and so when did we send out the letters to the parents?
We probably sent out a couple weeks after that. You know, when we first were looking at that, it was, well, what avenue are we going to use? We
Right.
didn't know that was going to be the avenue. It was going to be a different thing. So it probably wasn't the end of May that we knew that was going to be the avenue. But
And one of the schools that can charge Central, they were able to secure a grant that has helped them pay their, pay their difference. So,
And this
I mean,
basically,
it just,
it was at graduation when I got the call that the state examiners were coming back in, because this was a federal program to pull them, so that was graduation. The schools, we didn't know anything until really the first week of June as to the direction we would need to take. That was just the review was done during graduation, because that's where I was. And so after Memorial Day, then we started getting together, getting our heads together before we could share anything with principals as to what avenues we needed to take for these shortages. So, it wasn't like we found out something the middle of May. It was actually during graduation when they came up for the review.
So the parents were notified as soon as possible, following the awareness that we were going to have to find some alternatives to be able to.
Right. And like Lynn Fanning, they were gonna charge anyway, but, so like Jeff, did it, kind of what's been the reaction from your parents?
Well, the majority of our parents have been fine. In fact, they were, Ms. Sauter mentioned something about the cost of outside daycare. They just been, first of all, they were thankful for the slot, because they had so many that applied. But the majority were thankful because it was still less than what they were paying for that deal. And obviously there we did have one or two that had a couple questions, but for the most part, everyone's been okay with it.
Do the fees cover the shortfall from the, or is it close? Or
It's closed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in ours, and I was concerned about that, I didn't think it was going to, I think we were going to have a $27,000 deficit. Once we did the sliding scale per family, I did the math, and I think it was going to cover 26,000, I mean, let's see, it was 27, so it's $26,200.
and most of the schools I've talked with or have similar situations. But, a lot of that depends on the makeup of the class, who, it's a lottery, so who gets the slot? If the majority of the students that get the slot are higher poverty students and stuff, you're probably going to still have a fairly significant shortfall, and Mr. Massey has worked hard to, to try to talk to, whether it's legislative delegation or other agencies outside of just the school having to come up with that money somehow, kind of thing to try to do that. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to pay the bill, so.
And it put us in a unique spot, because I would say our system is unique, because we've aggressively pursued these grants. All of our schools applied, and all but one of our elementary schools have received these. And so it's, we've received more than any other system in the state. So it's kind of, this news, and we're being a county system and little local funding to be able to help. And our schools don't generate a lot of funding themselves. So it did make it, and we even considered turning some of the grants down, just because of the pressure it was going to put on the schools. So the principals kind of didn't have a choice in applying. We kind of asked them to apply, and so we kind of left them with the burden here. So especially the ones without the Title I funding, kind of left them to come up with it. But so we're going to evaluate this as we go forward and really question how hard do we pursue future grants with it. But from the results that we've had back, the students that have gone through the pre-K it's helped coming into that kindergarten, first, second, third grade year.
So when you have a salary scale separate from OSR, is it that you follow this local school salary scale for the positions, or?
So we follow our salary schedule, but OSR does have a recommended salary schedule, and we thought about having them with that on a separate salary schedule that would save a few $1,000s. It's only I think it's 10 steps. Is that right, Ken?
Well, and they've recently changed their guidelines too, this year to, I can't remember the exact verbiage, whether it's require or strongly encourage. I think it was more along the lines of requiring that if a school system's salary matrix is different than what they do, you follow the local school system matrix. So I'm not sure that we even have that option anymore, but that was just, that's 2 weeks ago information, kind of thing, fairly new.
Because
info.
anybody can apply for these, anybody can apply for an OSR grant, so they're not just in schools. So they would go by the OSR salary schedule. All right, thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solly, appreciate it.
Okay, Ms. Altwit is going to discuss some of the USDA paid lunch equity, and we'll be, I think we're voting on this a little bit later this evening, too. Item C.
The question that was posed to me was, what is the USDA paid lunch equity provision? Basically, it is a rule put forth by USDA to ensure that we are providing all of the students who do not receive free lunch with the same lunch as we are providing to free and reduced students. I know that sounds a little bit backwards because we always worry that the free lunch children aren't getting, but what they're concerned about is that we are not going to charge enough for our lunches, and we're going to be pulling reimbursement and using it to pay for the rest of those lunches. So they have an equation that they make us follow. Basically, they tell us how much, they dictate how much we have to charge for school lunch each year. There's an equation, and based on that equation, our average lunch lunch price for our students has to be $2.86 this year. Because of our sound financial status, I requested and was approved a waiver, so our lunch prices have not changed. Elementary students will stay $2.25, high school will stay $2.50. However, that waiver does not apply to anyone who is not a student in Madison County. So based on the equation, we are required to increase the price of employee lunches and non-Madison County visiting student lunches. If we have kids shuffling from one school to the other visiting, their lunch price will stay the same. But if we have a kid from another system come in visiting, their lunch price, it's dictated by federal government. The price that we have to charge this year is $3.09. For the sake of ease for the cashiers, we've rounded that off to $3.10. So it means that teacher lunches would go up by 10 cents per lunch, which is really quite insignificant in a large scheme of things, other than having to make change. We have virtually no outside Madison County visiting students. Mostly it applies to a preschool student, perhaps, that 4 or 5-year-old child who comes to school to visit big brother or sister, and usually they don't buy a lunch anyway, they eat off mom or dad's tray. So we are requesting an approval of an increase in the employee's lunch price to $3.10 and the visiting student lunch to $3.10. Any questions on that?
We got a waiver for the.
We have a waiver for the students.
Is that, I mean, we pretty much get there every year? Is that-
We have had the waiver at least 4 years in a row. At some point, they may tell us no, but so long as we have a sound financial status, they don't want us to get our operating balance too high. If they increase our lunch prices, the operating balance will just increase. So they let us keep our lunch prices where they are, but it only applies excuse me, to students within Madison County or within that are enrolled in your school system. You can't use it for a la carte prices. There is another option to raising the lunch prices, but it's using non-federal funds, meaning the school system would have to come up with non-federal funds, general fund money, to supplement these lunches for the teachers and these students. It's 10 cents charge per teacher. I challenge them to go across the street to McDonald's and buy a lunch that they get from us for $3.10.
So the $2.50 is just a basic lunch. It's not a la carte, it's not ice cream, it's
Correct,
not.
correct.
That.
That the high school students are paying, the elementary students for $2.25 and the high school for $2.50. It is their basic standard lunch. Their offer versus serve, 5 items, anywhere from 3 to 5 items on their lunch, including a milk, but no a la carte items.
All right.
We good? Thank you.
Ms. Altwit. All right, so now with this, we have Nicole and Jessica. They're with Glimpse, and this was, some of you guys, I think Sherry and Nathan met this group at our AASB conference this summer. This is a group that does kind of analytics and with kind of what's going on in the classroom combined with expenditures to kind of give a return on investment analysis. This is something that's kind of, I think, would be useful. We've talked with maybe even possibly partnering with the Schools Foundation to kind of help with this. And so just wanted to give you guys an idea, give you a chance to, after a presentation here, to ask some questions about groups.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for having us today. We'll try to keep this pretty short. I understand we might have some questions, so we want to welcome those in the meeting. It's funny because as we just finished discussing, most of our discussion is how to pay for things. And when funding changes and we find out different information, where is that money going to come from? And as we free up money, because what I hear too is, not that we have enough money to do everything we want, but as we free up money, where's the best place to put that money? So Glimpse works hard to give educators insight into what are the things, the programs, products, and services, human resources that we are investing in, especially when it comes to academics for all student types that are working. And when we do something, for instance, let's say for K-12, is that working for everyone? Does it work for all grade levels? Where does that funding come from? We just listened to a discussion about a cut in funding, if you will. When that happens, what are the programs that we don't need to slice 12% off of or 20% off? What are the programs that we need to keep in place, programs, products, and services that are having the most impact, so that we're not cutting across the board and kind of chipping away at things, if you will, but really looking at, hey, this is working really well for the students we intended to service by. Pre-K is another great example, How do we look at pre-K working in first grade, second grade? How does that impact our third grade reading scores? So those are kind of some of the insights that we're looking at with Glimpse. And as far as I know, I haven't been to a district yet that said they had plenty of money and they didn't need to make decisions that way. So now we're looking at, why is this difficult for us? And we have some very valuable programs and analytics in our districts. We have testing platforms. The state sends us a tremendous amount of data. What usually happens is, though, we have finance that is really working with object and function codes, balancing budget, all the explanations that you guys asked for, but doesn't really have a concept of a student. So we're going to take all the student achievement metrics tied to what you guys decide we're going to invest in and for whom in the district, and we're going to tie those things together. So number one, you're looking at what is the educational return on investment. So we hear about return on investment. We do it in industry. We do it everywhere, as well as in education. We love to grade and measure everything. Oftentimes, though, we don't really get to how do we get to those student outcomes. So we call it educational return on investment because we're in the business of student achievement. If it can't align to that, we really want to start digging in and asking questions. So again, we're capturing all the educational products, programs, and services, either singly in some instances or as a combination. So what are all the things that our 7th grade students are exposed to, either in foundational Tier 1 instruction or maybe intervention, and where are the pockets of students that that's working? We also capture some implementation data on top of that financial data, the demographic data, and the outcomes data, so that we're getting a good read on, was it this combination of products, programs, and services, or do we need to up the usage of this particular program, even the time of day sometimes, where it's implemented and how we communicate it across students, teachers, districts, and of course, parents. So really we're looking at, and I'm sure that based on your presentation, Mr. Solly, that how much time does it take to get the detailed level of information that we need to be able to make those decisions quickly. So y'all just talked a lot about funding sources. You talked about, can you take local funds? If it was an instance that you can, you really start looking at, is this the best use of our funds? Is pre-K something that in the community as your school system, I'm sure the parents are participating and appreciating that pre-K system, and we see that the research shows that. What we want to show is, what's the research say for Madison County schools? So You'll see some of the ways that we do this. And the big instance is, all these directors in this room have a job. We also want to take the workload off compiling and correlating that data and give them back the information they need, which eventually comes up to you guys and then out to the community. So some of the questions that we can look at, and actually in your hard copy packets, you will have a copy of this. This was just something we provided to give you guys a good example of what are the types of questions we're looking to answer. So, you know, the big thing is, I know you guys are working through a new strategic plan, I believe. So first of all, looking at, of our strategic plan, which is built through the data that comes through your system, is our spending aligned with what we've stated are our top priorities? And how does that look in different grade levels? How does that look for different subgroups? And how does that look for schools? Because you have some title and non-title schools. How does that look for them financially? What are the things that we're implementing across the district? And what are the things that we're implementing in the schools? And how are those varied? So when we look at things like, for now, Aspire data, if you will, we're looking at Aspire data and we're looking at some commonalities amongst schools and a lot of differences. What is making the difference in the outcome in our elementary schools? For instance, when we look at the variance between those different schools, those feeder patterns, you know, where are these particular products working? Same in grade levels. So oftentimes we buy things K-12 in education. So if I'm looking at, hey, this is really, really working in K-6, but not so much in 7-12, we're going to offer some data up to tell you, is it the implementation? Does it require more training? Are there other variations that are going to impact that data? So a lot of times we'll have, do a lot of due diligence, put some programs in place. We know it's well aligned to the needs. And sometimes a good example is we have districts that have tardiness issues, but they have early morning interventions. So it's not the intervention that's the problem, it's the participation. So we're going to capture that data too to make sure that we are getting the biggest bang for our buck, but we're also looking at why is it this way. A big topic for all of our schools is as we look at the climate in Alabama especially. So charter schools, virtual charter schools, if you're following the federal budget, the fact that title students' money could follow them out of the district as we get into school choice, that means every step of student achievement becomes more important because you're going to feel the direct impact if you have those students moving to other schools, which changes your budget and unfortunately causes a domino effect for us in the schools. And then, you know, some normal examples when we look across high schools, you know, an average of ACT scores. What is this high school doing particularly? Maybe a little better, or maybe the choice of products, or maybe how they service the students with ACT. Why are we getting higher ACT scores with some groups versus other? And it may be, which we measure this too, the average of which those students come in. So those are some of kind of the questions, you know, that we're looking at to uncover with Glimpse. And we built a product to make sure that it serves you up that data with a flag that says, hey, we're not getting the return that we expected here, which are based on goals that you guys set. So it's kind of a look at me versus having to go in and actually be a data analyst to read the data and get the answers that you want. So some of the benefits really quickly, and I'll make time for questions. Of course, the number one thing we're looking at is budget optimization, but the reason we're looking at that is to provide a higher level of student achievement for all students. So think about equity, again, subgroups, providing for teachers, what you need to provide to teachers to make them stronger teachers. We talk about personalized learning all the time. What do we need to provide for our teachers in a personalized learning environment for them to give them what they need to cover some of the gaps? Eliminate ineffective spending. So that could be a lot of different things. I'm sure there's not anywhere here. But we do kind of see, you know, district decisions. We get down to the schools. There are a lot of people in charge of different funding sources and different budgets. So we want to make sure that we're choosing the best product and that where consistency makes sense, we could replicate that. Increasing transparency. I know you have some staff here that does a great job of getting you numbers and getting you funding sources and getting you list of vendors and what have you. But also being able to look at that again in the educator's vernacular and in a visual way, being able to present that live at board meetings for the community. A lot of times we get pressure to do even more, and our constituents want to know, but why don't we have this and why don't we have that? It's nice to put up on the screen and say, here's where we decided to invest and here's why, because sometimes we are making the hard decisions. We can't do everything. Vendor accountability, so for people like us, I mentioned if we're having some good returns in K-12 but not 7-12, we need to do something else with that money. So going back to vendors and saying, hey, we appreciate your work here, we need to adjust this proposal for this amount so that you're freeing up money to do things better in other grade levels. Evaluating our curriculum and taking multivariate analysis, we're looking at multiple measures of data and layering that on top of it. Not only layering, though, but also correlating. So, again, taking that financial data and saying, what exactly did we use this for? Is it for reading? Is that in our strategic plan? And what was the return on that? And here are some of the ways that we do implementation. So again, we start, number one, with that strategic alignment, because most people know about your strategic plan. The next thing is, how are you paying for it? The next thing is, did it work? So those are some of the data points that we're tracking. In our implementation, we include leadership training on the EROI processes, and that can start at each level. So you could have that at the board level, the district administration level, and then down into the schools. And then we provide actually through our services an executive summary, and we do that no less than quarterly. So an executive summary kind of your status of EROI on your major initiatives. So I'll go ahead and stop for questions if you guys have any questions. And I know some of you have kind of seen some of this explanation before, but definitely welcome your insight. They told me you'd have questions.
You've done this in other school systems, I suppose. Can you give like some really specific, concrete examples of what some other systems are doing differently as a result of what you've done?
Sure, absolutely. I can give some very general ones. We go into actually some of the highest performing school districts. We have a lot of school districts that are in the top 20 and they're trying to get it in the top 10. We have a lot of heavily title funded districts. So we start absolutely by tagging the use of the expenditure, and that's where we start weeding out duplicate spending, if you will. So we have some really high level funny examples of we're doing a BYOD initiative or a one-to-one initiative with devices, but we're still spending the same amount on paper, ink, and copiers, an exorbitant amount. So that's a really easy, almost operational level of where can we free up this money and free up enough money even to invest in 4 days in that particular school of professional development aligned to instructional technology. So that was a good example of, we didn't really feel the impact of getting rid of 3 of the 6 copiers in the school. We did feel the impact of the reallocation of the funds into the professional development for the teachers. Also, we have a lot, we had one the other day, we talk about equitable spending with ELL. A good example of doing too much, too many distractors, teachers not knowing what is my first go-to when I have intervention is to line up everything we're using, which comes out to everything we're investing in, per subgroup to say, is it even realistic to be implementing all these different things in the schools? And that's another reason teachers can appreciate, because it's our goal to say, hey, historically here, when you did this intervention or this strategy, or you changed the way you were implementing this, 7 classrooms saw higher achievement than normal. And then so pointing out the specific things per subgroup happens almost everywhere. We have districts that ask us, we had a presentation on some CMP presentation, what is the impact of serving breakfast on high stakes scores or completing grades? What is the impact of student attendance? So a lot of times we're putting a lot of good resources in the classroom and we're measuring, the impact of that per student. But if something gives us a lower EROI, we need to layer the student attendance, because it may be that we need to invest in something to boost attendance to see the academics come through. So that happens a lot as well.
And I see a place where we can use this is just looking at our Title I expenditures. You know, you can see on the list here where, you know, that we have schools that are investing more in pre-K. Do you continue to use that investment in pre-K, or do you use instructional coaches, or do you use software? To be able to kind of, to be able to get a look at that, to get an analysis of it would be, you know, something that, it would be a tool that we could use. That's kind of what we're thinking. So it would be kind of an introductory partnership here is kind of what we're exploring. I think would be valuable to us to be able to analyze and to give us some feedback on a local school. Do they invest $15,000 of a shortfall into pre-K to match that, or are they better off investing that into, you know, something else? So that's kind of where we're at.
So are you using data we generate, or do you generate your own data? And if so, if you're using ours, where's the inter-rater reliability that says that data is even worth being used?
Okay, so we're going to use foundational systems of record to begin with, which comes with the integrity of the data. So we're talking about your next-gen system, which is the financial system that we work with in CFOs. With CFOs and that accounting side of the house, we're using iNow, which is also, according to the state and the feds, is a system of record. And then whatever achievement metric, which we actually will get to several achievement metrics. An easy one is high stakes. So Aspire for this past year, we'll be using Global Scholar from this past year. We will take the information directly and import it into our system. Now the correlation is where our work comes into play. There's a person in this district that verifies each of those data sets. So somebody in your district signs off and says, this is as accurate as we understand it to be, and that's the data integrity that we take it from. The other thing that allows us to do is keep anyone from having to enter too much data. So we're taking out human error, we're taking out some workload there as well.
Anyone else have a question?
Do you have any school systems in the state that are currently using your product?
We do. We have several. Some probably closer to you guys would be Morgan County. Hartselle City has been with us for a good while. Alabaster, Elmore County, Athens, Talladega. We've had some good feedback too, and if we look forward a little bit to ESSA, so we match the ESSA requirements for reporting what you bought, who you bought it for, and what the return is, which in federal programs we have to do now, and it's a lot of work. So you kind of service two different entities there. Federal programs is used to having to do that. Evidence of implementation. We also track usage data. I think I mentioned our participation data. So using that for federal programs, title funds, but also for ESSA requirements that are coming down the pipe, that will be a lot of work for someone to tag those things. We'll already have that done.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Nicole.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we got an addition that I would like you to consider for the salary schedule. This is on the coaching supplement page on the top salary schedule, which is page 7, is it 19, Ken? 19. We were going through and at the request of Ms. Rucker, and we needed to update this of how we allocate assistant coaches since we changed our coaching supplements, and we noticed that we didn't have volleyball on there for an assistant girls volleyball for a middle school assistant coach when we were going to on that allocation piece. So that being Title IX compliance, we're just asking to consider that. But we also thought it was an appropriate time to bring in soccer into that. There wasn't also an assistant there for soccer. The guidelines to earn an assistant is basically you'll need a second team. Our middle schools will need a second team, and then they earn an assistant with that. So we can't say they earn an assistant when it's not on the salary schedule. So that's kind of what we're asking you to consider, volleyball and soccer for that. So this is just kind of for discussion now. It'll be coming up for a recommendation on the 27th. Any questions? Ken, did I do that well? Did I leave anything off? Okay. All right. Well, I'll take that as a no questions then, so it's good. Next up is a discussion of the policy review process, and Ken, I am going to turn this completely over to you here.
We had a policy review committee, which consisted of 14 members. There's 6 teachers that MCEA selects, there's 2 support employees that MCESO selects, there's 2 administrators, 2 parents, and an administrative appointment by the superintendent. And then I facilitate the meeting. And that group looks at your policy changes and review. The problem is it's really kind of an outdated, ineffective way of doing it. We typically get 1 to 2 of the teachers that respond, 1 ESPO person responds, 1 administrator, and that's pretty much the extent of out of the 14 members who respond. So what happens is there's a lot of sending information out and it really doesn't go anywhere. So talking with the UNISERV director, Ms. Sims, who's here with us this evening, she had shared over several years actually that there's a different format that other systems use, and it really is basically utilizing the local organizations and their presidents or officers to disseminate information and get it back. And so we had a meeting, Dr. Minsky and I did, with Ms. Sims and the current MCE president, which is Ms. Moyer, and the current MCE ESPO, which is Sheila Landman. And we all talked about this, and we were looking at trying to go to this more universal format for the policy review committee that's used by other systems. And through this, we came up with, we discussed it, and I came up with a draft, and I sent it to them, and they had made some suggestions to that. And what you have here is the revisions from them. And now what we've done is we've sent this off to the actual current sitting policy review committee. And as you can see, out of the 14 people, you can see the 2 that responded to a change in the committee, the policy that governs their committee. And one of those happens to be an administrator, and one of them happens to be the teacher. So when they had an opportunity to express their thoughts on this policy that governs them, 2 other 14, I got a response from. So you can see the kind of, the ineffectiveness of how this has come about. So this is, what we want to do is provide it as an informational item so that you guys at least had information as to where we're looking at going with this, with the new policy. This would make things a lot more efficient, they would streamline things, and it would be basically the representation, the president or their designee who gets the information, to disseminate the information to their constituents inside the membership, and then provide us with feedback from those 2 people. So we'd be dealing with 2 people directly, and Dr. Minsky's even discussed having meetings with them prior to the board meetings to go over information and get garnish input from them, which is what the law says. And I quoted the law, which is 16130, as to what governs this, and the law requires us to seek input from the local employee organizations. So that's kind of where we're at with it. Ms. Stowe did contact me about a question as far as whether or not we should consider having the system-wide PTA president involved in this. The law does not require parental input. One of the things with that is there's some merit to it, but there's some problems as well. When you look at our Madison County system PTO, you have the president for that, and then you basically have 28 other school sites that have individual PTO. So the dissemination of information from that one to the second, and then from that PTA or PTO at the local school to disseminate information out and get it back, we may be hindering ourselves in getting beyond the 30-day window just to get input back and forth, which may slow things down. So that was one of the things that that Ms. O did bring to my attention, and we've talked about it a little bit with the superintendent and chief of staff, and we feel like right now this is the best way to go, and that we would, consider looking at getting input through PTO in a different format. So, questions, comments? You want to chew on it for a while? It's not up for vote or anything at this point. It's just an informational item. Let you know we do want to way we know exactly who we're dealing with our policy review committee for the academic year starting when the students come in,
So are most people a part of these groups, or most teachers a part? I guess, one's support and one's teachers, is that?
Correct.
Are most employees a part of these groups?
Ms. Sims, you have pretty good numbers as far as what our membership is out of.
1,400, about 1,400 employees.
1,400 out of the 2,300 are members in one of these two organizations.
Actually, 1,500, I'm sorry.
So the rest of them would never know anything, I guess?
Yeah, they hear it in the schools.
Well, that's kind of like where it is right now. If you look at our current policy review committee, they're only members that are on those policies anyhow. So the membership is designed to kind of be, or not the membership, but the policy review is designed to kind of share it at the school. And when each school has a representative for MCEA, and is ESPO as well, they have a local? Okay. And so that person would get information out into the local school and feed it back to the officer. So it kind of gives MCEA and MCEA ESPO the opportunity to kind of determine by their organization how to disseminate information and get feedback in. We're actually hoping that this actually gives MCEA and MCEA ESPO a better, place at the table and during the work sessions as far as information sharing, as well as them having control of their organization, getting information pushed down and pushed back. So, it's how hard the organization wants to get input on that particular topic, as opposed to us just generally, this is what it is, and whatever happens, happens. The organization would be responsible for actually really securing input and bringing it to the board for input.
Question?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cubic.
All right, we'll go on to some administrative items. First off, I will recommend the approval of the financial statement, payments of bills, and cash reports for May of 2017.
Motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any question or discussion regarding the current recommendation for financial statement, bills, and cash reports for May? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, I recommend approval for the following bids as attached.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Recommend approval of the USDA paid lunch equity increase as proposed.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Ms. Stowe, is that correct? Okay, is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, on the contracts for services, I'm going to pull item number 38 out separately, and we'll do it first. That's on, if you're on your spreadsheet there, it's on the second page, the second sheet there, number 38. This is the Appleton Plus contract, and so I recommend approval of item 38 on the contracts for services.
Say that again?
I recommend approval of that contract number 38 with the Appleton.
So we would need a motion and a second in order to discuss.
Oh, to discuss it. Motion, I'm sorry. I thought you were.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion regarding number 38 on the contracts for services?
Can you give us a little bit more information
Yeah,
about
so-
this process?
So what we're looking at here is, this is a contract with Appleton, and we have Ray here to help if you have any questions too, or to participate in the discussion, if you want to direct it to him. This is just for special education aides. We have about 80 total in our district. We have a pretty big turnover every year, about 20, 25 during the school year, after the school year starts. Because of that, our special education team, our staff, has a tough time keeping up with the training of new employees as they come in. There's also a break-in service by the time the the job is posted, and the principal has to interview and go through that process. So what this would do is it would allow us to work with Appleton. You know, we've got 38, a lot of other folks that we're contracting with here, but it will allow us basically to have contracted folks from Appleton to come in and to have us folks that are trained and ready to go. If they're out a day, they provide a sub for them with another trained person, something else that we have trouble doing. And so we really think this is going to be something that will benefit our students. And it's just for special education needs. It's something that has a 90-day out. If it's something that we're not happy with, that we can terminate the contract there or can end the services. It was something that we'd like to kind of try out this year to see if it will help in there. So that we have about, I may have already said this, but 20 to 25 new folks that come on. This is after the school year starts. That's kind of how big the turnover is with it. So we really think this is a way to that'll be really good for kids and to have consistent service there.
So this is not a one-for-one replacement. This is only to fill those positions that we don't or are not currently filling.
That's correct. It involves, you know, none of our current special ed aides that are coming back, we've got them back, and they're going to be continuing to work with us. This will be for our positions that we have needs now for our students, and they're not really positions. They're not allotted by school. They're really by the needs of the students. So the number that you need really depends on your students and your population. So a school may have 3 one year and 1 the next. So this is basically for what we have open right now, and then any potential turnover that we have during the year. That we think that's really where it's really going to help us is after the year starts, when there's a turnover in September or October, if somebody finds another job or wants something else to do, there wouldn't be that break in service. They could get us somebody the next day that's coming in and trained and hit the ground running.
Mary, right now, when a child is identified as needing a full-time aide with them, what's the turnaround of being able to get someone in that position with that child?
If it's a grant position, so we have a student that comes in out of state.
Right.
They require an aide because of their identity. So that's a new position, so as you know, the position is so by the time we post that, one of that position is
So is it out of the realm of possibility with Appleton that, let's say we have that situation where a student comes in from out of state, we suddenly have this requirement, it takes us 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to find somebody. Can the contract be done in such a way with Appleton to where you fill that position, but then allows us to go back in and post it, and when we find somebody capable of doing it, we put that person in, or how does that, is that?
Yes, up to the district, you can do it that way, if you want. We join a partnership and work together, and every district's unique in the positions they're looking to fill or what their needs are, but I would say bringing this in would give you added flexibility for just that very circumstance. And just throwing this out there, our average turnaround time from a job in need coming to us and billing it is 7 to 10 days. So it's less time that the student and the schools are having to scramble to figure something out. But the flexibility is there and the control is still with the school system. We, work with the school system, and so we understand that, and we just want to be a partner and work in ways that make sense, helping the school system save money or fill a need or, improve efficiency even further. That's kind of our goal. So we work in the direction of the district, but and supplement at your direction.
So the principal, Monrovia Elementary has an opening for an aide. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know if they do or not. They have an opening for an aide, so the principal can through the contract, you provide us with a pool of applicants that the principal then can look at and interview for that position, temporarily or permanent, regardless. He has the flexibility. The hiring and the removal of that individual relies solely at the principal level.
If that's the way you want it, absolutely. It's up to the school system on the status of employment for that person. So if they call and say, hey, we need this person gone, they're not doing what we need done, we can do that. If they love someone or want someone in particular, we can make that happen too. So the process behind the scenes is really up to you guys. We just supplement what the direction is you want, and then also the person, the training that goes with that job. So with special education, we're going to provide you with the restraint training, which is an in-person training so that they can effectively work with the student. We have a suite of online training as well, classroom fundamentals, special education basics. We handle training for tube feeding, diaper changing, a variety of needs that are in that capacity. So that employee, or pool of employees, the principal vets, will all have undergone that training and be qualified for the job.
So it's all to have his attention. So if we wanted to go ahead and we can fill these jobs, because you and I spoke before the meeting, Mary, you said you have about 20 applicants for about 11. I mean, just somewhere in that, we have 11 openings, and we have some significant. So we could fill those positions, we could interview, fill those positions, we could contract with Appleton for a ad hoc or standby basis to do exactly what we just discussed, where you come in if we lose that person, or if we need it to fill in, or if we have another student come in, you can fill that position temporarily, permanently, however the principal likes that. So we can do the contract however we
Yeah, it's very fluid, very flexible.
But what is the intent of on our side? Is that the intent? What is the intent of the contract from your? Yes.
Well, we've just said, a lot of it is to help us with the turnover throughout the years, to help us with the training, to always have a qualified trained pool of applicants ready to go at any time.
What is our turnover rate roughly in the aid capacity?
I believe we had a turnover last year of between 20 and 25 after the school year started.
And we
So
have
during
80.
the course of the school year, we had a constant turnover.
And we have 80 aides altogether, so not quite 50%, somewhere around 38.
We see that a lot in districts that we partner with throughout the state, that it's just on an as-needed basis. A student moves in, someone resigns, or something happens, and they have a hole in their workforce open up. They pass that on to us, and then it's our responsibility to get it filled and get it to the standard of the school district. We send someone and they're not a good fit, or they don't interview well, the school district lets us know. We take the appropriate actions to remove them from that situation and find someone else. So our intention is to help free you up, give you some time back, but also give you that flexibility that you're looking for when students come in and leave, or when you do have a sudden need. All you do is, pick up the phone and call us, and we'll take it from there. But you still remain in control the entire time.
I've kind of off-the-wall question, and reviewing the contracts made me think of it. So my view of what special ed aides do, and what you have mentioned here, and I asked the people who do curriculum, they really have no, it's going to sound bad, but let me get through the whole thing. They have no purpose for the actual curriculum. They don't do any teaching. They don't do they do more of what we would think of as nursing care or health care. They change diapers, they do feeding tubes, they make sure that the person is stable, gets where they need to go. They may do some other things, but none of that is in the capacity of teaching these students anything that we are responsible as an educational system for teaching. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So-
There are instances where they might, under the direction of a teacher, they might work with a student under the direction of a teacher.
So-
On an activity, but basically, yes, you're correct.
So I noticed that we contract several nurses as well. So is there a big jump between contracting 7 or 8 nurses a year and contracting special ed? Do they basically, I am a nurse, so I know that the difference between an aide and a nurse, I get that. But is there a lot of difference in what the workload that we're contracting? So if we're okay with contracting nurses, are we basically doing the same thing contracting aides, or are we interrupting a flow of curriculum by changing this to a contracted service? I think that's what I was trying to ask, but.
And I think that is an excellent point that you make.
these aides are, yes?
Well, yes, they are, they do have different qualifications, but it is another competency. It is, you know, and on top of everything that we have spent, and this is the positive for going with this, is what we just talked about, as far as training and turnover and all these things. But in all honesty, it is fiscally responsible as well. There is a cost of it. And that money that comes out of IDA, the budget, goes right back into serving our kids. So we're even better able to serve the kids if we can provide more. Because as you know, with any budget, there's a fixed amount. So you really have to look at how do you best get the services with what you have to look at.
The average, I mean, it's probably hard to say this, but what was the average time that we had a situation where there was a vacancy that from the time that the person left, the time that we were able to fill it in the traditional manner, say last year? I mean, did we go weeks, months?
We did not go months. But there were times when probably that would not be. Because oftentimes this was, you know, they will come in and resign and they're gone. It's not like they do to the
So in the interim then, without using the Appleton services, in the interim then, that child is now being, that another aide is now having to take care of that another child, or it becomes a,
as well as whatever duties they have.
right.
Do we have any sub-pool for aides? Do we just request a sub that will take an aide? Is there a certification that can be obtained as a special, can you have a certified special ed aide? Or, I've never seen one posted that way, but I know,
We don't, although there are different requirements, schools.
and how long do we train our aides when we hire them? What's the training, not the whole process, but just the length of time it takes to train?
Honestly, about half a day, we spend about half a day in training.
And your Appleton is trained for, is that about the norm for the process to train for about a half a day?
Yes, depending on the duties of the job. But like I said, we do the restraint training. That's usually a day to 2 day training. It's in
Mhm.
person. And then our online training generally takes anywhere from 2.5 to 4 hours to complete, depending on, of course, the employee, their work pace. But they did it beginning to end in one setting. We're looking at that. And then we do ongoing training as well. So if we're getting feedback that an employee is not performing well or not doing certain tasks, we have what we call a school advocacy manager. They spend 80% of their time going into your schools to make sure the aides are working well, make sure the principals are happy, just making sure that all stakeholders are taken care of. Part of their job too is to evaluate the aides and coach and schedule follow-up training as needed as well. So we're able to bring that into and scale that out on an as-needed basis. So that's something we take very seriously as well, is the quality of the employees that we give you. And they're employees that are from the community, same employees that would come work for a school system regardless. So again, we just spend, time on training, and then the processes that go behind this training.
Is the background check that Mr. Kubik would do and what y'all do, or is that a similar process? Is there,
We use
they
the
meet
coaching.
the same standards and there's
Local
no?
and federal.
Mr. Weiss, going back to your question, the way your proposed contract with them is set up, if you were to, say they had an aide that was employed by them that the principal thought was wonderful, if you do hire that person away from them into the district, you do have to pay them a fee. So you wouldn't necessarily want to use this like you would typically a temporary service.
I don't know if maybe I didn't specify enough. I don't know if I stated that wasn't my intent. I'm saying if
You were just talking about the different ways they could do it, and I was just going to point out
Yeah, I mean,
that
yeah,
there was a cost involved in one of those.
Okay.
That's all.
And I want to add, I didn't actually include restraint training when I said the half-day training. We do provide restraint training, although we do not train all of our aides. As I believe that they kind of work with that. The restraint training, I have to keep up, I have to keep 2 to 3 of my staff certified
without divulging your clients, you have other clients in the Madison County, Morgan County, Limestone County area,
In all of those,
in all the schools, and then some of those schools.
in every county you just mentioned.
So, I think, okay, so our intent, if we sign this contract, is that from here out, every principal will give up their preference to be able to hire themselves, or?
And that would be up to us. I would be fine if a principal thought that they had a strong pool of folks that would want to be a special ed aide, and they wanted to hire somebody, I would be fine with them posting the job and doing so. Now, that said, the way the contract is written, somebody coming in through Appleton would be making more than, I think we've got it equal to our third step. So, they would be, that person could also go, they could hire them through Appleton. They're like, hey, you'd be good at that. Go to Appleton, get trained, and then, we can
But
hire
they
them.
give up their benefits, right?
Now, Appleton has benefits too. So it's not the same. It's not PHIP, but in fact, they have it where it's more individualized, where if you're single, you can just get single coverage. If you're married, you can get for two. If you have kids, then you can get the family. If you want dental, all of that, and with that. So it's kind of more individualized, the health packages. But if a principal wanted to say, you know what, I just rather not have an Appleton, I want that to hire full-time, I would be open to that. We'd let them do it.
So why would a principal make that decision? Like, what would be a reason that a principal would decide to go outside the Appleton or
Yeah.
vice versa? What,
I don't know. Principal, can you think of a reason why?
No, but I mean, I can't think, because obviously we're going to interview what we're supposed to. However, there are some situations, maybe, for example, I had a position that was cut last time, in the total, because he's only talking about special ed aid, we had computer aid. So, we're moving her into the computer aid, but we'd be okay with what we need to do. But
I
in other
guess
words,
if
if
they-
someone who has proven themselves to be a good employee for a long time, we want to try to keep them, and they didn't want to go through that process, I guess, if that's what, if that.
Yeah, I mean, if maybe they were a sub for several years, you built the trust, and they really just didn't want to go through Appleton, they would be fine with hiring, and you had several subs that's willing to apply for that. And they say, you know what, I think I've got some good folks that would apply for this. I mean, it would be
Well,
fine.
they'd get retirement benefits, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a reason the person would.
yeah.
That's right. And I think you guys have a 401K.
We have a 401K.
Also.
We pay them weekly. We do incentives for performance quarterly and monthly as well. We try to really incentivize and take care of the employees.
And that's one of the things, a lot of our special ed aides aren't getting to retirement. When there's a 25% turnover rate every year, and they're not, you got to get 10 years to even qualify with it. So it's,
Well,
go ahead.
in all due respect, I mean, we're not talking about the people we have employed.
That's right.
We're worried about people we haven't employed yet. But we've got to keep our focus on kids and get our fit.
So right now, you have how many openings?
Right now, I have 11, we have 11 openings.
Okay, so that's gonna generate maybe $70,000 savings, right about? So what are we gonna do with that?
Well, I can guarantee you there will be at least 5 kids that probably won't be able to install it. We have other staff development, other things that we have to do for our special education staff and for our kids, materials that we can put back into the classroom, technology that kids can use.
But the funds coming from Idea B mean that the savings would have to roll back into the special needs Idea B. It couldn't go,
Last year, our budget is, Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, our IDEA budget was about $3.5 million. $2.5 million of that was planned.
70% budget.
Right. Which would continue
Very little
to be.
for,
Right.
other personnel needs that they might have to, such as optometrists when you look at their caseloads. And again, every year when we open, his bathroom takes a risk. The kiddos need aids, and we never know from year to year. We try to staff as best as we can in the spring, but you don't know. So, adding additional aids has been very difficult, and it's very difficult to tell our principals, just make it work with what you have.
And that's what Mary has been, again, we have a principal sitting right here. And, you know,
there are a couple things. My school's a high-need special education population school, so, Mount Carmel.
Oh, sorry.
So with that, we have self-contained units, and so if a student comes in at Newmarket School, at Riverton Elementary School, or at Mount Carmel, they come to Mount Carmel if they have moderate to severe disabilities. So if they come with moderate to severe disabilities in September, and we don't get any more funding until October, we're waiting. So if there were funds freed up, I think that that would be beneficial. But another thing that I can say from the perspective of the principal who does that a lot throughout the school year is, I know that you had mentioned the principals get to interview, place those people. To be 100% honest with you, the interview process is very time consuming. You know, you're going through the applicants, you're pulling in applicants. You're spending probably 8 to 12 hours on just interviewing, finding the person, making the recommendation. And when you're in the middle of the year and you've got a lot of competing demands going on, that can also delay that process. So them having a ready pool of candidates is appealing. And also, I love my aides. I have some amazing aides, and so I'm not saying anything negative about the way that we do it. But the quality of the applicant pool is sometimes not awesome. And what I have right now are, but at any given time throughout the year, that varies. How many people apply for a particular position, and the quality of the applicant pool. So if they're taking that screening process off of us, and then we have the authority to say that person's not working, that can't happen. To me, those are beneficial things from a principal's perspective.
So, let me just clarify, what I hear you saying is if there's a time frame where perhaps you've lost an aide and it's not a good time of year to hire, and you've got 2 applicants and neither one of them really, for lack of a better term, light your fire, but you have no choice because you have to have somebody, you have to hire one of them.
And then you're stuck with
And then
them
you
until
have no
May.
place for them to
Yes,
go.
ma'am.
But in this setting, you could have somebody that has been trained and has been vetted to hold that spot until perhaps you could post that position at a time frame that you would be able to elicit a larger candidate pool with perhaps some more qualified individuals.
Right, I mean, just even that option alone is good.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood that that's what you were saying, so I apologize for interrupting.
The contract, it's, if I read it right here, the term of the contract, it's one plus 4, 1 year, and then we have 3 option years or 4 option years?
You have 4.
Okay.
But you can.
The first year, we're locked in for
No,
1 year.
no, no.
We can terminate if you want to, but, yeah.
With a 90-day
Okay.
notice. So 90 days is the window you terminate any time.
Well, then there's an early termination of 30 days too, right?
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, it was kind of confusing all the ways you can
That's why I was trying to, so the board is so.
So there's a lot of ways to get rid of y'all. Okay. Just want to make sure, it's like dating, you know.
Yeah. We're not clingy.
So there is a
No needy
30-day
people.
notice too. I mean, what is the difference in the 30 and the 90?
Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Where's the 30?
It can depend, honestly.
Page 3.
If we just have one employee working, we can expedite a lot of things. We do a variety of services, so without getting in the weeds, some of them are more intensive and more entrenched in the school system once you get them up and running. So there's different windows that we can operate within. For instance, if we launched an after-school program, that's a lot harder to undo. We put our software in, so on and so forth. So there's a variety of HR services that we
Yeah.
provide.
Looks like the 30 days is at the end of the year. The 90 days is if it's in the middle of the year.
That's what I was thinking, when I passed it to Cynthia. to
Do
look
you
at.
provide notice to them of your intent to terminate not less than 30 days from the date of the notice? And then the termination would be the 90. Because the 30 days is a notice provision.
And then it's 90 days thereafter.
Okay, so let's say we get into this and then we decide we don't like it about November. So 30 days later, we can tell them we don't like it, and 30 days later we can get out of there. Is that not true?
Okay, 30 days before the end of the term or any subsequent renewal period, you would give them notice.
So the-
Let me
There's
see.
an early termination, it's 90 days, but the 30 days is like, if we say we go 1 August,
End of the year.
if we don't want to renew them for another year, we have to give them an early termination of 30,
Okay.
1 July of.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's after the term, yeah.
So 90 is really our key.
90 is really
I'm
good.
trying to find
Yeah.
it on here.
Now it's on page 2,
Okay.
120.
90 is early.
Are we using any local funds now for special aid? No. Okay.
Are we allowed to? Can we do that? We can? No. Because we can't use them for pre-K.
We use local funds for any state foundation funds for our special education teachers.
Teachers, yeah.
Locally. So that leaves the aides, like they were in the Berlin, the IDEA,
Right.
It is 120. You're right on that.
Do what?
Correct. It is 120. It's 30 days for notice and 90. I mean, I'm trying to read it quickly, but I don't recall because we negotiated this several weeks ago, but
Okay, so.
it looks like you're right.
In
It's
the middle of the year, it'd be 120.
Looks like that.
But
But-
at
but-
the end of the term, it would be 30.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I mean, I'm looking at it quickly, but you could also, if you had a significant problem, you could ask them to release the people, and the contract would be in place, but you wouldn't have any employees.
Right.
Because at any point, you can say, remove Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so from this school.
So I think we have different schools with different dynamics. Like, some schools, like yours, sounds like it's intense, this problem. And some, it's probably not too intense. And so,
A good example is not nearly as intense as ours as it is right now.
right, so if I were you, I would want to maintain control over who I hired if I was in an unintense environment.
Well, you probably have less special education aides.
That's right.
So what do you have, 2?
2.
And you probably have 9?
Seven, seven, 8, maybe.
So you have 10% of our aides. If we have 80, correct? It's somewhere around that.
And most of mine have been with me for some time. You know, they're tenured employees with the district. They've been, you know, and they're great. But we've added units in the middle of the year. Another thing just to consider is, last year we had 2 extremely high-need students who had aides in the classroom, and they withdrew and moved out of state in the middle of October. It was fall break. And so then, at that moment, we had aides that we were paying that we didn't really, at that moment, have a required need for. Of course, you can always find things for extra human capital to do, and I'm not complaining. But if you're being physically responsible, that's something else to think about.
Ms. Bass, I do have a question. So let's say during the year, one of your wonderful aides decides that he or she no longer wants to work there or finds another job and resigns. How do you think that the remaining aides would feel about bringing in somebody from the outside?
I think it'll be initially scary, because change always is initially scary because, they're going to want answers to what their job security is and how it impacts them. But I think if the communication from the district level is clear, that this does not impact any existing employees, I think they'll be fine. I have just a very wonderful group of people. So I have, I know them and I feel like they would all feel fine. I don't think that they would feel superior or intimidated by someone coming in from an outside agency. I think that they would welcome them just like anybody else.
Even if it was on a temporary basis, a couple
Yes.
weeks, a month, 2?
Yes, because oftentimes when we are in a situation where we're taking a critical needs student or a medically fragile student, we're trying to find substitutes who will come in and work. And that's very difficult because you don't know the skill set of the substitutes that are coming in. If you've got a child who's medically fragile, they may come and last 4 or 5 hours and be like, I don't think this is what I signed up for, and then we end up shuffling aides, our existing aides, well, you can go and work with the collaborative kids, we'll pull that aide to work with the medically fragile child today. So, so you do have those situations where they have to do that anyway. Work with people who are temporary. We had a situation, last year we had a student came in who really needed kind of one-on-one support. And we had to manage that with a substitute for quite a long time just because of the particular circumstances with that child. And the more you change, so this child specifically autism, they have that disability and every day they come in it's somebody new that they're having to work with. It's difficult to meet their needs because they need consistency. So there are some advantages to not having to depend on a substitute pool in those short-term situations or in the situation of hiring like that.
How do you think that impacts the same question that Dave asked, except for not your other aides, but rather your parents of your special needs students?
I don't think that parents know anything about how our MT people are hired or how they're paid or what organization or agency that they come from. They care about whether the people who work with their kids love their kids. So the quality of the candidates that applicants send us would be what would determine how they felt about it. So they're going to want somebody consistent, and they're going to want somebody who loves their child. And beyond that, they're not really worried if they have specialized autism training in most cases, or if they're trained with that particular medically fragile thing. They want to know their child's safe, they want to know their child's loved, and they want to know that their child is taken care of in the amount of time that we have them. So I don't think where they come from would make a big difference.
But the consistency would.
Correct.
Or the ability to have someone there immediately that could remain
Correct.
consistent until there was another opportunity perhaps to bring in somebody that would be.
So how quickly from the time that the board were to, if the board were to approve the contract, from the time that the contract is approved, how quickly can you implement and start putting folks in the class?
Our typical standard timeline for a district of this size is 30 to 60 days. Given the nature of what we're talking about here, we've done it a lot quicker, and we plan to do it quicker. Like I said, our average turnaround from the time that we receive a request to the time that someone shows up for work is 7 to 10 days. So if everything's approved and we get a request, then we go into work, screening, vetting, recruiting, training. We have the person I mentioned earlier, the scholastic manager, coming in, meeting with the staff, making sure they're comfortable with everything, making sure everyone's familiar with one another. So I would say within 10 days, just to be conservative, we could have someone working there from the time that we get notification that it's needed.
But the way I read this, we pay as long as we're using someone from your organization. If we're not, then
You don't pay anything. So if there's no hours, you only pay for the hours worked, basically, is the best way to sum it up. So if there's no hours being worked, you don't pay anything.
From a liability standpoint, does this help us any, or is, like, somebody messes up?
Well,
How does that work?
you do have indemnity
Yep.
language in the agreement, and they are insured. They are required to have insurance.
An Appleton person, whereas if one of our employees messes up, I mean, does it help us liability-wise to do this?
Arguably, it could, because they have their own comprehensive liability coverage. They have workers' comp if it's required of them, and then they have employer's liability also. So that between the insurance coverage and then the indemnification language that we asked for, it gives you another entity by which, bears some financial responsibility if something goes wrong. Yes.
Do we drug test everybody now in our system?
You don't have
Bus
to-
drivers.
No? Okay.
Yeah, just bus drivers.
Safety said the bus drivers are really the only ones that are required
Oh, okay.
by the state.
The contract had a 2015 date in it on page.
Yeah,
something.
first page, second page, terms.
Page 3. Is that intentional or unintentional?
Probably
That would not have been intentional.
unintentional.
Look up in the terms, on the third page, it's August 2015.
That's when we negotiated it before.
Mhm.
Okay. So we'd have to set that term.
So it is a fairly large discussion. So my question to the board would be, are most of you comfortable with continuing this tonight? Or is this something that most of you would be more comfortable bringing back up? Or does everybody feel that?
I would move that we just table it until next week. I think Nathan and Sherry asked originally that we not vote on it the same night we discussed it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not done discussing that though.
Oh, okay.
Right.
But, I mean, the vote,
No, and
I
I'm-
would
I just-
ask that we table that.
Okay.
Yeah, and what we could do is bring it up as an informational item. I'm not saying stop now, but as we get further into the discussion, I got the feeling that there was some concerns that were larger than a one-night discussion, I guess is what I'm saying. And I wanted to make sure that perhaps there were some things you wanted to go back to your communities about, but what was your next question, though? Because I still would like to continue.
I mean, if you
Yeah.
want to keep going. huh?
I'm good. I just wanted to make sure I knew where we were going as far as administratively.
So, okay, so we were calling these instructional assistants in this contract, right? I mean, I think that's the language, which I guess correlates to our aid instructional. There's no reason for that difference, is there?
I wouldn't think so.
We intend to use them for special education aids. We really don't have instructional aids.
Well, that's what the salary schedule says.
What
It
is that?
says aid, comma, clerical and instructional, which I
That's
guess.
our PE aids, computer aids.
Yeah, they're
That's
all
not
in the
special
same,
ed aids.
they're all in the same salary band.
I would suggest you update Exhibit A and specify position category special education aid instead of instructional assistant.
Okay. What do we call our special aid people?
They come on your salary schedules as special
They're all
education
classified
aids.
as aids, and because there's so many different ones, I mean, you have computer aids, and you have special education aids, and then you have special student aids, and then you have, PE aids, and so they're all in there, and they all deal with some piece of, like, for lack of a better term, instructional, but they're all in that classification, so they're all paid off that same salary schedule.
So they are called aid,
They're
comma,
aids.
clerical and instructional. I mean, that is them, right? Okay.
And you can we can, it's kind of what you were saying, you may have somebody that goes from a special education aid to a computer aid, back to a special education aid, they're all in that same.
Right. So, but in this contract, we're calling them instructional assistants.
We can
Does that
change
make
That was
that.
just the
sense?
language
Does
that
make
was,
sense?
that was proposed. I would recommend that you change that language to special
More
education
specific.
aids.
We can do that.
Are we going to interview these as a practice? Is it our intent to interview all these Appleton people before they start? Or are we just going to hope they work out before we
So the
vet
principal,
them?
a principal can say, hey, I need somebody, and just send me somebody, we'll see if it can work, and we'll let you know if it doesn't work. Or Appleton can send a principal 3 people, and they can do an interview with those. So it's kind of at the preference of the principal. We do this now with some of our custodians. Some custodians, the principal wants to interview every single one of them, and they go through it. Some, they'll ask Tim Middlebrooks over our custodians and say, hey, I need somebody, send me somebody, and Tim takes care of it. So it will be similar in that fashion. It can work at the preference of the school.
Okay. And do we have to do anything to the contract to let the principal decide if he even wants to use Appleton?
If they came to us and they said, if it's one that just has an aide, let's just say Jeff, like, you know what, I just feel comfortable that I can get a good candidate pool, I want to take the time to interview and do all that, then it would just be instead of, because it has to be the district contacting Appleton to request that, we just wouldn't request one, they would just post the job.
So we just leave that determination up to the principal?
Yeah, and obviously the principal would talk with Mary and me, and then we would, determine that on a case-by-case basis.
But it
It's
would
a
be the
se-
principal's decision.
Yeah, we would be fine with, we're not looking at
But you wouldn't
ripping
save
this
money
position.
then, but which is what you're
That's
trying to
correct.
do. right?
Well, it's not our primary thing is to save money. The part of that is really, you're able to reinvest into that, but, you know, that's a byproduct of it. The main thing is to be able to have a better transition.
So it's the
trained
district's
person immediately.
Default to go to Appleton and then leave it up to the principal to make that choice. So as a principal, you automatically are going to have an Appleton employee.
So when somebody needs an aid, there's a conversation between our special education department and the principal on, hey, you got a student coming in, do you need there's an assessment of that situation. And there's a conversation that happens there. If a student that has an aid goes from elementary to middle, there's a conversation that happens there. Hey, when we do staffing, on our staffing meetings, we determine you're going to need 3 special education needs this year. There's one that's following the student, or, you know, and then we do the shuffle around. But if it's someone that, if it happens in the middle of the year, in the summer, if that request presents itself, we would definitely abide by that. With the principal request that in that conversation, we would work with them on that for sure. All right, well, we'll table that and, until later. So I'll recommend the approval for all the other contracts as presented. That's numbers 1 through 37.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? I did have a quick question. I usually don't. I do. We have nurses who are employed. I don't know who, I know the nursing director's not here, and we have nurses who are on contract. What is why do we do that differently? Is the contract nurses more for filling in like the daycares and the extracurricular? So that's kind of what we would call our as-needed people that we can, okay. That's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure that I understood that correctly before we move forward. Thank you. Anybody else besides me got a question? All right, all those in favor for the approval of contracts number 1 through 37, please say aye. Aye.
All right, item E, I recommend approval for principal at Madison Crossroads, Ms. Linda Arredondo.
Motion.
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any discussion concerning we're approving the contract?
I'm sorry, right now.
Approving the principal.
Yeah,
Okay,
the personnel
contract's next.
action.
I apologize. Approving the principal. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All right, and I'll recommend approval of the probationary contract for Principal Linda Arredondo effective July 21st.
So we can pay her.
Yes. You've hired her, now you get to pay
She's
her.
risking to make her principal, and she's just going to do it for free.
Volunteer service.
That's who she is.
We need a motion. We have a motion and a second, however you want to time that out over there. Is there any discussion?
Look on the scrolling agenda.
Yeah, that one
Yeah.
we fixed. There's a name is wrong on that, so Priscilla updated that. So,
Okay.
yeah, there's a more updated one if you open the other one a while back. So it is Linda Arredondo, so,
And this contract is based on our salary schedule?
yes.
Any further discussion or question? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Congrats, Ms. Arredondo. All right, I recommend approval of the following personnel items, the addendum number 1 and addendum number 2 as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, or, I'm sorry, is there any discussion? Anybody have any questions?
I do have one
Regrets?
question.
Yes.
The pending certification thing on some of these, so we're 2 weeks from school. Does that cause any problems?
No, the pending certifications that you see on these, what we have is we verified that everything is at the state, and they've clarified that it's all there. It's just the piece of paper has not been issued yet. This is one of the things that spent some time with Mr. Curry discussing at length.
Because we have quite a few, I mean, there's quite a few on here.
And a lot of, they could be reciprocities, they could be, we're waiting on the state to actually go ahead and say, the paper's in the mail. And so, but everything's down there, there are scores, everything is listed on the, and it's just pending the state to issue the license. So we're good to go on that. But while you made a comment, just so the board knows, if you saw those are lengthy, there's 82 employments, there's another 21 transfers, another 4 administrative actions. Ms. Brunsman, our personal manager, is here, as well as the 3 ladies and the staff that you guys have for your personnel department do a phenomenal job getting this done, especially in a short time. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank them. They do a great job for you and the board and the superintendent. So.
Are there any other questions regarding the personnel agenda? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, I want to introduce and now to you guys our federal programs and Title I department. And that's Kim Haynes, which will be our Title I specialist, and Carrie Bass is now our supervisor of federal programs.
And I just want to say that neither of you ladies are replaceable where you came from, but we are both, I personally am very glad to know that your tremendous capacity will be used across the system now. And I promised I wouldn't cry, Carrie, so I'm going to stop there. I might just start. But I am tearing up just a little. Carrie and I started together in this district, I think, and it's been quite a growing, and she's been a very helpful resource to me as a board member. And I know. I'm going to need tissues.
Being able to face people. So, as much as I appreciate this appointment, and I promise I'm going to do the best job that I can.
I cried when Mr. Perkins left, too, so it's okay.
It's not going to be easy for me to walk away from 5 years. But I'm looking forward to the new skill set and the opportunities that this district. So, thank you. And you've got kids.
Good grief, now I look like a big girl.
I'm so excited. So, we're going to make a great team. It's going to be good.
We have an executive session next.
And after that, we have a certification to move into executive session to discuss pending litigation. The only thing we will discuss upon returning or vote on upon returning is adjournment, which I can assure you will be unanimously aye. Do I have a motion to move into executive session?
So moved.
Second. And a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye.